How do you convince a scientist that has been in the lab for more than 20 years and how do you convince that person that AI is suddenly here either to replace him or enhance his sites?
Science advances one funeral at a time. Because sometimes the old generation will never change their mind, right? But eventually, folks that have been trained in an old way of doing things will die, and then a new generation comes in that has been trained in a new way of doing things, and then that generation, makes the decisions, right? So I suspect, something like that, may end up happening here. It's kind of hard to say. I'll say that, even in software engineering, right, which is of course an area in which I'm more familiar with after having a couple of decades of experience. Not all software engineers believed initially that language models could write code effectively, right? And even people that understood that it was possible, they thought that it would take many, many decades to get to a level of quality where it could replace a human person. But what we have seen, obviously, right, if you're anybody that has used, Cloud CLI or Codex or one of the many systems that are working today, Debian, there are many of them. We have seen that these systems can write code with a reasonable level of quality. They can do, when prompted, in a correct way, they can do things that the human engineers will take much longer to do. They can work for, in many cases, hours. And if they have the right tools and if they are set up the right way, they can accomplish tasks that would take many days for a human engineer. And we have seen that people that use the systems effectively are, easily an order of magnitude more productive. Now, of course, it's not, they're not magical, right? Like, we haven't reached a point yet where they can really replace a person, right? And, many times, the problem is, prompting them the right way, making sure that all the context is added, right? But I think it's been very clear over the past few years that for a lot of folks in technology, the mindset has shifted from, a language model would never be able to replace an engineer to, I think that you probably replace at least junior engineers over the next few years. And then, of course, they're going to end up replacing more experienced people, right? The moment that they get a little bit better understanding requirements. So we have not reached that yet within drug discovery, right? Like, I think we're still a little bit far. And, in other areas outside of software engineering, there is this problem that the people building the systems are not necessarily the people that have an intuitive understanding of the problems, right? I think one of the reasons why automation or AI for automation of software engineering has succeeded so much in the past few years is because the same software engineers that build these language models, that build these agents for software engineering are the folks that have a good understanding of how software has to be built.
Correct.
Whereas in any other area, it's a little bit harder, right? So, you don't have marketers building, AI agents for marketing, right? Like, they typically rely on software engineers. You don't have, drug hunters, building, AI agents for drug discovery, right? Even though, like, we have, people that have experience, with drug discovery, but typically it requires a combination of skills. I think at some point over the next few years, we're probably going to see drugs approved that were designed entirely using AI. I think some of the ones that are most advanced in terms of clinical trials today are from Insilico medicine. I think they have a fibrosis drug, for example, that just passed a phase 2. And I think there are a few others. But once those drugs start getting approved, hopefully in a few years, I think the kind of opinion of scientists in the field will start shifting.
How do you see Gen AI evolving as a tool of productivity for scientists and users? And then how do you see them making the transition from Gen AI to the AI agents that you are making to an AGI in the future and maybe an ASI?
Language models are very, very powerful, but they are still, they can't do everything by themselves, right? So if you go and tell ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of that language model that you prefer, I want you to build me a tool that makes this specific process in my pharma company better. It doesn't know how to do that. doesn't understand your process, doesn't understand what data is, it doesn't understand, how you make decisions. There are lots of things that still need to happen. I think over the next few years, we're probably going to see a little bit of a shift where folks, like myself and others, are going to build tools that adapt the language models to specific workflows, to specific tasks within pharma, right? I mean, in our case, of course, we're doing computational chemistry and we're automating that computational chemistry. But you can imagine, easily people creating tools that apply language models to clinical trial design or to experiment design or to, all sorts of different, wet lab, kind of processes. Or deciding where to invest, right, or what technologies are more or less useful, or which scientists to fund with grants, right? A lot of the different things that are happening inside of a pharmaceutical company, and I think it will be interesting to see whether that innovation comes from biopharma itself, or it comes from people outside of the field that decide to switch. And
where do you see the world 5 or 10 years from now? Do you see organizations that are R&D organizations that run entirely on AI? I know there are many companies like Vision or Edison, if I'm not wrong, Benevolent, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Benevolent, for example.
Yeah. And companies like yours as well. How do you see this, this new wave of startups like yours, sort of paint the world in next 5 to 10 years in terms of R&D?
Most of the Insilico drug discovery world is drug discovery tasks are automated, where there are very few humans that actually do this. So if you, it's kind of hard to compare, right? But if you think of, because we haven't reached the same level of automation anywhere else, right? But if you look at code generation, for example, right, which is maybe the most mature, the systems that generate code today do not generate 100% of the code. But in some companies, they may do, 20, 30, 40, 50%. I think it may be realistic to get to a point where the systems generate 90% of the code, and then somebody reviews and supervises and kind of, adjust a little bit here and there. I think it may be the same thing for drug discovery, where, we have systems that read every single paper, every single scientific paper that is published, systems that keep an eye on what kind of molecules are easier to synthesize in real life, and then what kind of technologies are useful, and then continuously look for indications and molecules that may be applied to those, and then they design experiments, and then they have a budget for running experiments in whatever way they think is most convenient. And then that system may be continuously churning novel molecules for certain underserved, indications, right? And that thing may be running 24/7 autonomously, coming up with novel molecules, day and night. I think it's entirely possible that something like that could be built, within the next 10 years. And then the constraint would be, well, we still need to do animal experiments, we still need to do clinical trials, right? These processes are still expensive. Hopefully, I don't know, it probably won't be us, but somebody else, is working to optimize clinical trials, is working to make those processes cheaper, right? So, if we have 1,000 different potential molecules for potential indications, somebody may come in and say, what, we're going to do this, 25, right? And then we're going to put, $1 billion, we would run those trials and then, come up with more data. But I would love to see a future in which we have more than 40 drugs approved every year, right? 30, 40, right? Like that's kind of the average in the US, right? So I don't see why with the same level of kind of spend that we have today, we couldn't take that 10 times higher.